Hi, folks, and welcome to this episode of Not Just Business, where we talk about people. One of the things that we all have, and which may have taken us a lifetime to build up, but which can also be destroyed in seconds, is our reputation. So I am privileged to have with me today Regine Roux. You've got to be Afrikaans to be able to pronounce that name, but she is an expert on reputation management. Thanks for your time, Regine, and welcome to this episode.
Thanks, Derek, and thanks for having me.
So tell me, how did you get started in this business? I mean, what do you have to study to be a reputation manager?
I must admit, I never, ever actually thought that that would be a space I would get into. Initially, when I started years ago, I thought I wanted to do PR and event management. And this was when I was obviously considerably younger and you don't quite know what you want to do yet. But I
still don't know what I want to do.
So I studied BCom Communication Management, did my honors, but then when I wanted to get into the space of communications and PR, I couldn't get a job because I didn't have experience, and you don't get experience because you don't have a job. We all know how that scenario goes. So then I got an opportunity to work for a management consulting firm as a research analyst, and I thought, I don't quite know if I want to do that, but it's a good foot in the door and somewhere to start. So during that time, we then started to do a study to understand what is reputation made of and what is the reputation of the IT industry. Now, this was many moons ago, before every second company said that they're reputation specialists and online reputation. So that specific study, I was then allowed to convert into a master's degree. And I thought, I haven't studied all of this time not to do PR and event management. So then because I had a little bit more experience by this time, got an opportunity to go and project manage the Soweto Festival for Del Lucas Promotions, which I absolutely loved. And I loved learning so much from her. But one of the key things I realized was in the world of public relations, how unstrategic it was. It's very much a pray and spray approach. You send out a press release and you just hope somebody picks it up. And I thought, what I learned academically and theoretically wasn't quite aligning to the real world. And I wanted to bridge that gap. And I also realized it doesn't just help to communicate for the sake of it. There needs to be a purpose behind it. And then I also realized and just came to see the importance of reputation. Reputation so much more than just fancy marketing and a press release. It's your whole business and how you as a business acts, behaves, thinks. All of that contributes to how you communicate internally and externally.
Okay. So just distinguish for me for a minute the difference between, say, having good ethics and having a good reputation.
They're very much linked. One of the key things is having good ethics. You are either ethical or you're not ethical. There's no gray. With the reputation, you have one. Whether you are consistently good at something or consistently bad at something, you are building a reputation for yourself. But the basis of a good reputation lies with having core values, such as good ethics, as a foundation for your decision-making.
What are some of the pointers to what would make somebody an ethical person? How would they know? I've heard of tests such as, if your kids know about what you're doing and you're happy that they know, then you're fine. And, if you're happy that it comes out in the press, not necessarily doing cartwheels, but you're not uncomfortable with it being in the press.
There's a good thing. We actually were speaking to somebody the other day, and they reminded me of, would you be happy with what you've done put onto a billboard on the main highway?
Okay.
Would you feel comfortable with that? But the other description that I've heard about ethics is, would you still do it when nobody is watching?
So just tell us a little bit about your business. What obstacles have you encountered in establishing this business? And then I'd like to hear more about what kind of resistance you've got from clients and what is your average experience in a big corporation?
So I started Reputation Matters in 2005. So this is our 15th year.
That's a long time ago. You started in primary school, obviously.
Yeah, so the business is a teenager and it has had its challenges. There's actually 7 business lessons that I've learned. And if somebody else can learn them from me, please do, because I've learned them for you. Don't make the same mistakes I've made.
That's exactly the point of this whole series.
So the obstacles are more from client buy-in that you mentioned earlier. We get interesting questions and just mainly understanding the reputation side of things. But the 7 lessons that I've learned, first and foremost, crucial thing is getting the right accountant, somebody to help you with your finances right from the start. I went through a number of accountants that spoke about creative accounting. The only thing that gets really, really creative or really colorful is your language. When you see that things don't really link up in terms of what's needed. SARS isn't going to go away. Pay SARS, they ask interest and they pay penalties. So that's the long and the short. That was one of my first lessons. The second lesson is, as far as possible, if you can, have the business in your own name. Try not to go into partnership. So all of these business lessons are ones that I had from personal experience. It works for some people, but I found when you're in a partnership agreement, more often than not, what happens, the one party feels that they're bringing in all the work and the other party feels that they're spending all the money. There's not a balance. And you need to have proper paperwork in place right from the beginning. Have the difficult conversations right up front. Steer away as far as possible from doing business with family and friends. I've had, again, experiences with both. It gets so tricky and difficult when there's that personal relationship and you have to tell a friend or a family member that their performance isn't up to scratch. It really, really makes Christmas lunch very awkward. Then the other one that I wish I'd actually learned much earlier in my career or developing this company. One of the key things when you're an entrepreneur, when you start your business, you are very much operationally involved. So, for example, when I started, I knew I wrote quite well and I could do events quite well. So I ended up doing all the events physically. But as a business owner, you actually are no longer going to be operationally involved. You need to work on the business, not in the business, because you're the captain of the ship. So the minute you are down there rowing with your team, you're going to go into circles. You need somebody that has that vision, that leads the team and knows where they're going. The other key thing that I've learned is write down everything. Have an audit trail. These days, luckily, there's phones so you can record it if you don't want to write it down. After a nightmare session, and it caused me having to be at the CCMA, I've just learned to write down absolutely everything. Don't give things away for free. That's the easiest and quickest way that you're going to devalue your service, devalue your product, and people will not respect it. So if anything, ask a marginal amount of it. And then finally, and this is also one that I think many entrepreneurs, and again, from my own personal point of view, is the importance of focus. When you start out as a smaller business, you want to keep your head above water, so you do everything for everyone. But the more you focus, the more you can actually focus your communication as well in a specific area. And it's then a lot easier to make decisions who you want to be doing business with. Yeah.
You say don't be seduced by opportunities which look attractive in the short term, but are not really what you're in business for.
Absolutely, most certainly.
So let's get to individuals first of all. And I know that's not you obviously consult to corporations, but within corporations, I mean, individuals are the guys that screw up, or girls for that matter. What are the kind of things an individual can do to refrain from or to enhance or protect their reputations?
The first and foremost, and again, this is, as you mentioned, from a corporate, but also individuals' point of view, we often see people, corporate leaders, saying, I'm tweeting in my personal capacity. Unfortunately,
off the record.
Off the record, absolutely. There's no such thing as off the record. There's no such thing as no comment. So as an individual, looking after your reputation is to have that solid base of values, because you're walking the talk as a leader and you need to set the example in terms of how things need to happen. And you need to protect that with absolutely everything in you to make sure that you look after your reputation in everything that you think, your behavior, your activities, what you say. When you take on that leadership role as an individual, I mean, the eyes are on you. You are not just a person per se anymore, but you are that whole company. You are representing everything and everyone behind that company, all the associations as well. So, I mean, for example, if you think of Lance Armstrong, he's trying to rebuild his reputation. I don't know how many millions, tens of millions of US dollars he spent to try and rectify that. But in a podcast interview I was listening that he was having, he said he's paid so much just for lawyers and to get his image back. But his big thing is how much money his charity has lost. And it's people don't think further than that sometimes, that it's their actions do so much damage with the other organizations which are dependent on them for funds and things.
If I, as an individual or even a CEO of a company, get slandered on social media by somebody who misstates the facts, how do I recover from that? What should I do? What would you do if you were an advisor to such a company, the CEO?
What's really important is to act fast. Because I think what we often see is that because within a corporate, there's so much red tape to go through, and this needs to be approved by this and that and the next thing. But people want, in this day and age with technology, want results and answers right now. So if somebody has messed up, they need to act immediately. And what's also important is to have all the facts. So if somebody slanders you on social media for whatever reason, is to then to be able to respond to that point by point and say, well, this is what you've said, and then counter it. The facts are X, Y, Z. And the longer you take to get those facts, or as we mentioned earlier, if you've got a no comment, people are going to make up their own minds. Now, if you've built your reputation and you've had a consistent message going out there and you've been authentic about it, you're going to have built up a little bit of a reputation credit to your advantage, where people will, if they see something which doesn't quite resonate with the image that you have been sending out, they'll question it twice. And, they'll first want to also get your side of the story. But if it's something that you've never looked after your reputation, you've never really cared about that side of things or communicating, then people are going to take the facts at face value without asking more questions around it. So being quick with your feedback, giving authentic, transparent facts, and then keeping stakeholders involved, depending on what the crisis or the slander, whatever is to make sure that there's clear communication around that.
So if a company appoints you to help them with reputation management, what are the typical things you would do? What sort of interventions would you do within an organization to make sure that their practices are okay?
So very often where we start, we call them to look and help manage a reputation. But to start off, we need a baseline to understand exactly what is the reputation. So what does reputation actually mean? It's a perception. It's a perception that different people have of your organization. It's not necessarily the truth, but it's their perception. And it's that perception that is their reality that they then communicate internally, externally. And there's different aspects of the business that's going to be important for the different stakeholder groups. So we then help to identify what are those gaps. So we quantify, first of all, to be able to measure what is the reputation of this organization. So let's say it's 68%. It could either be a number of things that there isn't sufficient internal communication, they don't have the right resources. There's 10 different elements that we look at. From there, we help to identify the gaps between what's important for which stakeholder group, and then we rectify. So we quantify, identify, rectify, and give practical recommendations of what can be done to improve a reputation. And what we've also done and what we've seen a big, big need for, often we do the research, which is great. And it just is sometimes quite an eye-opener with blind spots that we help to identify. But then life happens and the year continues. And a year later, when you need to do the research again, that nothing has happened with it. So we actually now also have a mentorship program where we work very closely with the organizations to transfer our skills and to help them how to then take these results and do the implementation. So we don't want to come in as external consultants and tell them this is what you must do, but we'd rather empower them with the skills that they can do it themselves. So that's quite an exciting new venture that we're on at the moment.
That's interesting. So normally where people get into trouble, especially CEOs, is by posting something on Twitter, which is not well thought through. What are your views on CEOs even posting anything on Twitter? What are the pros and cons?
As I mentioned earlier, I often see CEOs saying they tweet in their own personal capacity. And I think first and foremost, there needs to be a communication, social media policy, and training for anybody, for any corporate, for any organization, just to actually get to grips with how powerful social media is and understand exactly how it works. Because if we think about it, the internet never forgets. You might post something and think, oh, I shouldn't have done that, and then delete it. In that short space of time, a number of people would have already taken screenshots of it. It's never going to go away. It's going to haunt you forever. So the first thing is the training, understanding it. But just as importantly is the company needs to ask, is social media the right channel of communication for us? Because we've often seen companies investing a lot of time and resources or thinking, oh, you know what, now we're hearing about this Instagram thing. You need to be online. We need a Facebook page. We need all of these things, but not realizing or really understanding their stakeholders. Are their stakeholders using this specific platform? So I think it's important to understand which channels of communication are most appropriate for our audience. Do they prefer face-to-face? Do they prefer maybe a webinar? Do they prefer an email or a telephone call? Instead of creating this Facebook page, for argument's sake, starting very enthusiastically, getting a little bit unenthusiastic and passing it on to an intern, or perhaps even your niece or nephew that's in matric at the moment because they understand the technology side of things. But that's just as dangerous. If you had to do a big speech in an auditorium and ask your niece or nephew to go and do the speech on your behalf, would you do that? So why do that on the social media platforms? And then from there to do very much integrated do's and don'ts training with a whole organization. And that policy is so important as well. Just in terms of words that you can and can't use. Because again, yes, everybody's got their own personal Twitter accounts and there's a corporate Twitter account as well. But by association, you are still representing that organization. So that is really, really key. What we've seen as well in the past is people that manage social media platforms, they sometimes get confused between their own personal one and then the corporate one. And that can also be quite disastrous for an organization. So, best just to invest in experts to do it for you and then invest in that training.
Murphy's Law will always apply, Let's say you've got a client, a big corporate client, and the CEO decides to put his foot in his mouth on social media and then immediately gets a backlash. And before you even hear about it, he has put in another tweet which just changes the foot he's got in his mouth. How would you deal with that? In other words, there's a crisis, a reputational crisis.
Well, the first thing is to see what the crisis is about. And then again, get the facts straight, first and foremost. I mean, we've seen, there's 110 examples each day where that happens.
Every day,
So we do need to have a look at what the specific scenario is and get the facts out as soon as possible on that specific channel, but then also seeing where else is there perhaps some damage that has not, it would of course damage everywhere, because that's where journalists go and get their stories as well. So,
well, let's take a not so social media case, but quite a high profile one. If you were asked by the royal family to take them on as a corporate client, if you like, because they've got an issue with Bonnie Prince Andrew, what would you advise them even before they withdrew him from public service and that kind of thing? What would you approach? Hey, first of all, I forgot to ask this, is it the kind of job you would take? And if not, why not? And it's a nice company to have as a client on your CV, the royal family.
Is it? Okay, would we take them on? Most likely not. And the reason I say that, our focus is Africa. So we want to be Africa's reputation specialist, building businesses people want to do business with. So most likely not that we would take them on. So again, just as I mentioned earlier, focus. Focus is Africa. So that's one of the reasons it's easier to say that wouldn't be a client. But as you mentioned, he has been taken out of the public. He's been relieved of, I think, his public duties for now. And I think that's very fair until he actually can prove the facts from his side. And I think that's really, really key. Whether it didn't, it did, it whatnot, to be able to give feedback and his side of the story, innocent until proven guilty or guilty until...
Yeah, I think probably in reputation management it's the other way around. You could get somebody lays a claim, you did this, and then you have to prove that you didn't, rather than them proving that you did.
Absolutely. So proving that it didn't happen. People want facts, and facts speak for itself. So if you can prove that you haven't done it and it's backed up and substantiated, and then to do that sooner rather than later. I mean, this has been coming, it's not just something which has happened now, it's been coming for a while. So I think one of the key things as well, not just in Prince Andrew's point of view, but what we often see is it takes so long for people to come clean about stuff. They'd rather just sweep it under the carpet, and they deny, and they just absolutely don't face it. And then years later, oh yeah, no, sorry, they actually did do it. And then, it's just way
so it's
too late.
compounded.
Yeah. So rather, pull that plaster sooner rather than later. Yes, it's absolutely horrendous, but people are going to have a lot more respect for you because people mess up. It happens. But own up to it. Be authentic about it. Be genuinely sorry.
Yes. I remember a movie long ago. I think it was called Clear and Present Danger with Harrison Ford. We advised the president. The president turns out that he didn't know this, but his best friend turned out to be a drug dealer. So Harrison Ford it was a minority opinion. The rest of the people in the room, in the Oval Office said, deny it. You don't know this guy.
Exactly.
And he said, no, I think you should do the opposite. Say, yes, he was a friend of mine, a very, very good friend, in fact, and obviously very disappointed to hear what he's done. But,
exactly. Spot on.
Yeah. So what about small companies? Reputation management is probably not something that occupies their minds, but they're probably just as vulnerable as large companies. Or are they?
Absolutely. And we often get asked, so why is the reputation important? And if we have a look at some of the latest studies that's come out, CEOs regard 63% of their market value is attributable to their reputation. Through all the studies that we've done, a good reputation equals a good bottom line. That's pretty much the easy equation. So as an entrepreneur, as a small business, as somebody that just wants to start their own business, it's absolutely crucial to have the right building blocks and the right mindset from the beginning, because doing the right things in the right way will help you to build your reputation. People will want to do business with you. They want to pay their hard-earned cash on your product or service, and so you will grow. And where you start is to have a very clear vision and values that you're non-negotiable about, because that's going to guide all your decisions. I'll give you a very quick example. A number of years back, we were approached by somebody in the environmental space wanting us to help them with their reputation. We then, after a long discussion, it came to the fore that what they needed to do their business needed to be imported from China. And we're like, in the environmental space, so how do you justify the carbon footprint? And they're like, no, we don't talk about that. So it was really quite easy for us to then make that decision, because we have very clear values when it comes to how we conduct ourselves, what we resonate with, to say no to that specific business. And I think very often as an entrepreneur, you kind of just take on anything and everything just to be able to keep your head above water. Mm-hmm. But the minute you start compromising on your values, it might be okay for a while, but it is going to bite you in the backside at a later stage. Just as importantly is to make sure that you get the right people on board from the beginning. So having the right values so that you attract people with similar values, but then also the importance of, I mentioned consistency earlier. We're quite obsessed about consistency, because if you're consistently good, you'll deliver consistently and improve your reputation. And that's why policies and procedures are so important. Because I think also very often as an entrepreneur, you do everything, as we mentioned earlier. So you just do everything. You are the HR, marketing, finance, ops, CEO, general bottle washer. But you do need people to help you. You cannot do it by yourself. And even if it means just getting an administrator to start off with, just to lighten the load with things like that, but getting the right people on board, making sure that you have a recruitment process to attract the right people to start helping you to build that business. And then having the key messages right from the beginning. What is your USP, your unique selling proposition? I love asking companies, and again, as an entrepreneur, the sooner you can get this right, the better. If you can describe in 8 words what makes your organization unique. Now, if you're going to say it's the quality or the service or it's my product, I can guarantee you that's what your competition is also saying. What sets you apart? And then making sure that everybody shares those 8 words. And then what's very, very important as well is making sure that you're not the best kept secret. You need to communicate, make sure that you use the right channels of communication. And social media, as much as I said, isn't for everyone, does work very, very effectively without having to break the bank. Sure. But you need to make sure that you've got the right messages to send out. Don't focus too much on the expensive advertising and expensive search engine optimization. Concentrate on getting your building blocks in place, because that's going to help you with the word of mouth and getting the message out there as well.
It's interesting what you said about having the values and then living by those values. I've now, I think, 4 entrepreneurs that I've interviewed so far. You are the third one of the 4 to have mentioned that specifically. And 2 of the other 3 have actually turned away big money. And the one was just really starting out. So for them to turn away a 10 million deal because it involves distributing alcohol in the townships, when that was part of the values, that we don't do that. This client came along and this was their pathway out of cash flow problems forever. And they walked away from it. For the new entrepreneurs, I think, are much more ethical, and some people and some work for big companies, big consulting companies would say, and it's always a couple of individuals that spoil it for everybody, but we would say, I have my principles, but if you don't like them, I'll change them.
Absolutely. One of the key things just on values while we're chatting about them was I didn't want to come up with values that I dreamt it up myself. So I actually got my whole team involved with it. So we went through a whole exercise and narrowed it down to very specific values. And the values are being experts in what we do, empowerment, making sure that we grow ourselves, learning all the time. And again, that's where the mentorship comes in, teach the companies we work for, having ecstatic clients, making sure that they're happy. But through all of that, excellence always in all ways. So everything that we think and do needs to resonate with that. So what we also do during our team meetings, every Monday we have a team meeting, is we actually have a section of our agenda dedicated to our values, where we share about an experience or something that we've read that resonated or didn't resonate with our values. So it's top of mind the whole time with the team. So then it is easier to make decisions as well when those difficult things come along.
I suppose it's not quite relevant in your industry, but have you ever been tempted to do something which didn't resonate with your values?
There's 2 examples. The one was the environmental company that imported stuff from China. That was quite an eye-opener. Or it was actually quite a nice, it's okay to say no to this. The other was a company involved with this whole Gupta saga, and I won't mention names, but they said they need some reputation help and they've got a marketing budget. And I said, no amount of marketing is going to help you out of this. You need to have a very, very serious think about your CEO, your board, your structure, and then maybe. But now is, marketing is definitely, and it's okay to say no to work. I think that's also one of the key lessons out there.
So what kind of things other than that would make you decide to not take on a client?
Yeah, so we wouldn't work, for example, with questionable lifestyle choices. Respect if you are, for example, a smoker, that's absolutely fine. A British American tobacco company wouldn't be a company we would resonate with. Political parties. We love working with government. Government needs as much help and work because we want to improve South Africa. We want to have a better country that people want to invest in, and a better continent. So where we can help government, we will work with government. But individual political parties or individuals, we steer away from that. Yeah, the thing that you don't speak around the dinner table, those are the type of clients we won't necessarily take on.
Okay.
But other than that, where we can help, we'll happily help and grow the company.
So what is your view, and I know you've done surveys on the average reputation of South African companies, large companies specifically?
We actually busy with a really, really interesting study at the moment for the African Public Relations Association, APRA, not necessarily just South Africa, but measuring ethics and reputation on the African continent. So that's quite an exciting project, and it's the 3rd year that we're doing it, so that we can start changing the narrative of Africa, because we are our worst enemies when it comes to promoting ourselves and yes, we've got many challenges, there's many gaps, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So what is interesting, and I'll get to answering your question, this research looks at reputation ethics on an individual, a company, and country level. Now, most people answering the questionnaires do regard themselves as fairly ethical. Some don't necessarily, which is always good because we want people to be as transparent as possible. But where things start falling apart and where the biggest opportunity lies is getting the governments right, the countries right. But what's also interesting is very much from a corporate point of view, the higher up in the organizations, they think that they're ethical, but the perception that the more junior people have of them is a massive gap in the organization. So the leaders aren't necessarily walking the talk. They think they are, but that message is definitely not getting down there. But what's also interesting to me in terms of this whole study that we're doing, and we need to keep our leaders accountable, be it in corporates, be it at government level. I attended the Brand Summit SA last year. It's again in June this year, where one of the big pennies that dropped for me, and I know it's also kind of obvious, but each one of us are responsible for the reputation of the companies we work for, but also for South Africa and for the continent, how we speak about it. Yes, it's got issues, but the more we focus on the negative, the more we're going to attract the negative. We need to be focusing on that positive and the positive message as well. So yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I do think that with studies like this, it's getting people to understand it. And what I love about this is how ethics are perceived, for example, West Africa versus East Africa, North and South. What's ethical in one country is definitely not ethical
in
another country. So now that's a very long answer.
Very long, but very positive, and it gives us hope. And thank you very much, Regine, for your time. And it was a very, very interesting and informative talk. And we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
If you would like to get hold of either Regine or with me, drop me a line on my website, www.notjustbusiness.com. That's not-just-business.com. Alternatively, send me an email at Derek, D-E-R-E-K, at derekpeed, that's P-E-A-D on the end of that, .org. Derek at derekpeed.org. Thank you for listening.